Bien, bonjour. On n'a pas le diaporama. Donc, oui, j'ai donc le. Ah oui. J'aurai donc le plaisir de vous lire la communication de Mauro Perra et Fulvia Lo Schiavo, qui ont envoyé un manuscrit qui est en anglais. Vous aurez de l'anglais, non pas avec l'accent inimitable italien, mais avec un accent fort allemand. Et donc, j'espère que ça nous arrange quand même. Et voilà, trouvé. Bon. Merci. So, real war versus symbolic war in Bronze Age nuragique Sardegna, an alternative interpretation on the warlike paradigm. The traditional interpretation of the nuragic civilization was founded on a war paradigm, starting from the assumption that the nuragi were strongholds defended by warriors. In reality, no trace of violence has ever been found inside the nuragi, but only the signs of daily life that continues without visible interruption from the Middle Bronze Age to the final Bronze Age. This contribution suggests an alternative interpretation on the basis of data from three main bodies of evidence. First, the social organization, as it is possible to deduce from the nuragi and the nuragic settlements, the tombs and the sanctuaries. Second, the impressive number of votive weapons in comparison with the real weapons. And third, the nuragic representations of warriors in bronze and stone showing a more ritual equipment than a practical armament. In Sardegna, the Tolos nurage is one of the more commonly used indicators of the warlike interpretation of nuragic civilization. This is especially true of those nuragi with a complex plan, where the main tower stood high in the middle of a multi-towered bastion with an upper walkway supported by stone or wooden brackets, inner corridors, sentry posts and loopholes, surrounded by a powerful stone rampart with towers. Nowadays, on the basis of the stratigraphic context found in several accurately excavated nuragi from final Middle Bronze Age to initial and intermediate final Bronze Age, show that their everyday use was centered on food conservation, transformation, and consumption, while traces of warlike activities were never found. The typical burial structures of the nuragic Bronze Age is the so-called giant's tomb, which was constructed during the period between the Middle Bronze Age and the Final Bronze Age, so 18th to 12th centuries before, and is widespread throughout the island. This name, by now commonly employed in specialist literature, indicates a monumental burial structure over 20 meters long with an estimated height of 5 to 7 meters, formed by a covered gallery with a semicircular structure on the front, etc., and the entrance at the center. The other part of the gallery is usually rounded and apse-like in shape. These features form the basic layout of the typical nuragic tomb, although in practice there is much variety. They were collective graves in which a permanently settled community used to inter their dead over generations. All the members of the community had access to burial, and only a few of them were initially associated with the few grave goods found there. The bodies had probably been wrapped in shrouds, with the bits of pins found would belong to, but they were not accompanied by individual grave goods, usually rare, while weapons are even rarer. The etc. was the ceremonial space in which the community rituals of offerings to the dead were performed. These megalithic monuments were true ceremonial centres dedicated to particular forms of ancestor worship and bear a symbolic importance in the control of territory. The tomb Arupio I of Oroli is a giant's tomb with an orthostatic, partly half hypogeic chamber and with an exedra, similar to other funerary isodermic structures typical of Central Northern Sardinia in Middle Bronze Age 3 and recent Bronze Age, to recent Bronze Age. As we said above, the presence of a fair number of objects is unusual in such tombs. On the contrary, here more than 300 glass, faience and bone beads, probably arranged in necklaces, were found, with parallels in Sardinia, in Italian peninsula and in the Mediterranean world in Middle Bronze Age 3 to recent Bronze Age. Also, the few vases, 3 small bowls and a small jar, are diagnostic for recent Bronze Age. The presence specifically of white wine was detected through the biochemical analysis carried out in the pots. As to the bronze objects, the discovery of a complete votive sword stuck in the bottom end of the chamber is exceptional. Moreover, a fragment of a second votive sword and 2 fragments of the horns of a bronze figurine of a deer were found in stratigraphical association, presumably to reconstruct as a hunting magic. Here a unique occurrence because in a tomb and not in a temple. A special class of weapons are the votive swords, which are quite peculiar in shape and of vital importance for the topic in discussion. These swords are characterized by a very long, on average 120 centimeters, narrow, on average 2 to 3 centimeters, and straight blade. They are defined as votive because of their shape. The composition of their alloys and their small hilts do not make them practical weapons. They are especially linked to the construction of sacred buildings, where they are stuck on the pediments of temples, Su Tempieso Orune, Monte San Antonio, Siligo, and others, denoting the structure of the temple itself as both a symbol and an offering. Votive swords are found everywhere in sanctuaries together with offering tables and were placed in the interstices of the stones, fixed with lead and pointing upwards. Small fragments of votive swords have been found in association with oxide ingot fragments in various contexts, as well as in 4 hoards. Their occasional presence, whether complete or fragmentary, in the giants' tombs indicate that from the beginning of the nuragic civilization, weapon worship, oplolatria, and ancestor worship underwent changes in form and place, but not in intensity or importance. The flanged hilted swords were widespread throughout Europe in the Bronze Age. They were leaf-shaped, pistiliform. In France, the British Isles and the Iberian Peninsula, these swords characterize the Atlantic Bronze II period, 11th century BC. In Sardinia, these 3 swords of this type were found in the hoard of Oreo Siniscola Nuoro and also shown in the hands of 3 bronze figurines, the one of it a chief of the tribe and the others of a warrior and of an archer. They are held in the right hand and rested on the shoulder. A later Huelva Saint-Philibert type sword is known from Siniscola, unknown provenance. The Monte Saida swords are a product of local evolution in parallel to the Huelva and Carpstone or Nantes type swords. Daggers with a short tang, which may be of roughly triangular, trapezoidal, ogival, or other shape, or even rectangular, a linguetta, and a broad V-shaped blade, whose cross-section in the middle is rhomboidal, are found widespread over the whole island. They often have incised decorations. Several molds for the production of dagger plates exist, one of them on which both pieces survive comes from the nuragique village of Dorgali. In the few cases in which the bone or ivory hilt has survived, a very fine dagger with an hippopotamus ivory hilt was found in the well of Sanantine Ginoni. It has exactly the same shape as a dagger made entirely hilt and blade in bronze with a rounded top to the hilt. The gamma-hilted daggers, so called for the shape of the hilt which is extended and bent downward to protect the fingers, are perhaps the most characteristic weapon of nuragique panoply. They are known in all sizes, from miniature to full size. In the full-size ones, to the heavy hilt may have been adapted the stump of a votive sword and sharpened for the purpose. These were ideal weapons for hand-to-hand fighting. Gamma-hilted daggers are represented on the breast of almost all the male bronze figurines, so this weapon must have had a symbolic value much greater than as a simple item of weaponry, and probably indicated the acceptance of the young male into the community. Spearheads and spearbutts of great dimensions and of notable strength are widely distributed over the island as actual weapons. They have an octagonal cross-section and often a decorated shaft. Several casting molds for spearheads and spearbutts have also been found. Up to now, 2 bronze figurines of warriors carrying spears are known, very different from one another. The first is a splendid bronze figurine of a king shepherd found in the sanctuary of Serra Nieda Sorso. The second, made in a rougher impressionist style, was found in pit tomb number 3 at Antas in association with Allumiere type amber beads dating to 11th, 10th century before Christ. Since it is impossible to relate weapons or other grave goods to age, gender, kinship, or other social status indicators, consequently, it is essential to get information from the other available and exceptionally rich source, the bronze figurines representing warriors, and to compare the actual weapons with the ones portrayed on sculptures whenever possible. Recent discoveries of bronze anthropomorphic and zoomorphic figurines have been made in stratigraphic association with recent Bronze Age, Final Bronze Age, and with Final Bronze Age 1-2 pottery, respectively. All of the figurines were made by the lost wax technique. You have warriors hold a votive sword with their right hand, with the sword resting on their shoulder. Heroes with 4 eyes and 4 arms holding votive swords and holding shields, which is a doubling of the preceding pattern. Warriors holding a votive sword on their left hand with the sword resting on their shoulder. The shield is suspended by a belt to the sword and is hanging at the back of the figure. And the chief of the tribe's staff and votive sword number 4. The warrior's defensive equipment consisted firstly of head protection by different forms of helmets. The body armor was composed of high-ribbed neck protection, shoulder plates, a breastplate with or without a baldric. Elaborate greaves covered the calf. The warrior is usually represented barefoot as a worshipper. The shields are rounded in shape, generally bearing 3 discs and a grooved band with a conical boss at the center. The defense equipment of the archers is exactly like that of the warriors, with the exception of the shield. The archers' offensive weapons were bows, either very big, as tall as the archer himself, or quite small. Alongside these were the quivers and the directional feathers. This is the defensive equipment most frequently portrayed, but by no means the only such. Studded breast protectors, aprons, and wings protecting the back of the head are also known. There is no fixed relation between the nuragic bronze figurines and their various weapons and armor that are portrayed. No one bronze figurine is ever identical to another. This allows us to presume that there was not a structured military organization. Archers are most frequently portrayed. In Giovanni Liliu's Sculture della Sardegna nuragica from 1966, there are shown 27 archers. 13 have their string bows on their shoulders, 10 archers are shooting, 3 archers are holding their bows upright, and 1 archer is nocking an arrow. Among the new documents, there are now to be listed 6 stone statues of archers from Monte Brama. Archers and warriors seem to belong to the same social class, since their armor is identical. The military and social importance of the archers is confirmed by the fact that one of the archers from Monte Arcoso Uta holds a great leaf-shaped pistiliform sword in his right hand, resting on his shoulder, and identical to the sword of the chief of the tribe. Another important evidence of the special role in nuragic society held by the archers is the praying archer, orante, from Abiniteti sanctuary. He is holding the bow on his shoulder while standing on a couple of 2 deers on top of a votive sword. This was true hunting magic and unique with an archer in the middle. In nuragic Sardinia, the symbolic value of the weapons portrayed in the bronze figurines and in isolated amulets seems to counterbalance their actual value. The use of the stumps of votive swords as dagger blades is a confirmation of this symbolic value. Another supporting argument is the stump of a votive sword with its original hilt, which was buried in the Senorbi warrior grave, the only undisturbed individual inhumation with a weapon left, dated to the end of Bronze Age, beginning of the Iron Age. In conclusion, in nuragic Sardinia, that is from Middle Bronze Age to most of Final Bronze Age III, the expression of war is mainly by ritual representation, in which ancestor worship and weapon worship are expressed with votive weapons and symbolic amulets. This does not mean that the relationships among different nuragic groups were not competitive and never resulting in armed conflict. What is denied here is the paradigm that in Bronze Age Sardinia war was an institutionalized fact, while any armed conflicts were local and transitory in character. From these arguments, it is evident that the remarkable but perhaps misleading aspect of the bronze figurines, and apparently of a minority of the stone statues of Monte Brama, Cabras, may influence the interpretation of nuragic society as a warlike and aristocratic one. Merci.
Alors, merci pour cette vision novatrice, peut-être pas novatrice, mais au moins nouvelle par rapport aux théories ou aux visions anciennes de l'état nuragique. Et cette thèse, je dirais, plutôt en faveur des colombes que des faucons.